Juicy Co-Creators, Lilou here. I'm in Toulouse today, south of France, with Lynne McTaggart. Hello.
Hi, Lilou.
Thank you for accepting this interview. I'm so honored to be sitting next to you. What a surprise. I was here to interview Neil Donald Walsh, Barbara Max Hubbard, and here you are. I didn't know. I love this. I love this new connection.
Wonderful.
and how we can now share this with the world, and it can go out. To me, you bringing important information. You bridge the science with spirituality. You wrote many books, many bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiments, now The Bond. So I would love to start this conversation with how do you define science and spirituality? And are those changing? Are those evolving so that they can finally meet up? Because it was very, very much two separate words.
For several centuries, we've had a very dogmatic and materialistic view of the world, and that's been our science. And spirit has been very mystical and very other and very much about unity and unproven ideas. Well, now science is really proving what those ancient masters espoused for many centuries. It's talking about unity. It's talking about everything being part of a greater whole. And much of what we think of as our materialistic world has much more to it. We're far greater than what we've been told.
You're saying that instead of we are much stronger when we unite and weaker when we compete. Tell us how you prove that scientifically.
Well, my latest book, The Bond, is really all about answering the question, were we meant to compete? Was it meant to be this dog-eat-dog, this individualistic? Were we supposed to be every man for himself and survival of the fittest? And so this time, I looked not only at the physics, but at biology, psychology, anthropology, all the ologies. And the resounding answer is no. Nature doesn't have a drive for domination. The obvious conclusion from all of this science is that nature has a drive to wholeness. Nature has a drive to connect, and nature has created us to share, care, and be fair. We were hardwired to connect, and the main reason is because nature sees us as part of a greater whole in every way, from our subatomic particles to our bodies to our relationship with everyone around us and everything around us. There is a bond. And by bond, I mean a connection so integral, so profound, that it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins.
And what is the missing link then? Where have we gone wrong, or how can we find that bond again?
Well, the missing link really had to do with our understanding and our progress in the world. Science essentially writes the story we live by. And the story we've been told for the last several hundred years is the story of a very, very materialistic universe comprised of individual things that are very well-behaved things operating according to fixed laws in time and space. This is the worldview given to us by Newton. Mm-hmm. Then we have Darwin coming along saying that there essentially is not enough to go around. And so there is a struggle for survival, a survival of the fittest. And Darwin's ideas, it's impossible to underestimate his effect on the Western world, because his ideas came around just when mass printing evolved. And so they swept the globe, and they became a kind of defining mantra for every new burgeoning idea. It became a justifying principle for capitalism, became a justifying principle for colonialism, for one race being dominant over another race. Hitler loved Darwin. It became a justifying principle for business, for sociopathic behavior, everything. This idea of there's a struggle to survive and one person has to be top dog. And that has been the engine of just about every aspect of our societies in the West. Competition is the engine of our educational model, our financial model, our business model, our relationships, our neighborhoods. God forbid somebody else gets a Mercedes when you're still driving a Ford. We're all imbued and hardwired with this competitive urge, but it's not natural, is my point. We're acting against nature because nature's designed us to feel good about connecting and giving, and nature's designed this bond. So my real question in this book was, why are we in the mess we're in? And the reason we're in the mess we're in is because we're living against our true natures. And this is what selfish looks like. This is what individualism looks like. It looks like the ultimate destruction of every one of our societal structures, which is what we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. So how we get back there is by reprogramming the hard drive. And the hard drive now has been programmed with I win, you lose. Mm-hmm. And that's the way we think we have to win. And the new program has to be I win only if you and I win too.
How does this connect then with your work, the Intention Experiments? I know you put some groups together. Tell us about that experiment and how then we can use intention to change this world.
Okay, well, I've been experimenting with big groups. I've done 24 experiments to date on my website using groups around the world, and we've done amazing things together. We've changed essential properties of plants. We've made plants grow faster, food grow faster. We've purified water. We've even have some very provocative data on 2 separate studies showing a real lowering of violence in war-torn areas using the power of intention. And this is big collective intention where tens of thousands of people are joining in.
So putting groups, everybody focuses on the same thing, the same thoughts.
Everybody focuses on the same thought, the same target, and we have the exact same wording. I tell everybody, this is the phrase, think this phrase, imagine this. So everybody's thinking the same thought at the same time. So we're playing around and experimenting with the idea that when there's lots of us, our thoughts are even more powerful. Mm-hmm. So I've also been experimenting in little groups in what I like to call the power of 8. Whenever I've been doing workshops for the past 5-6 years, I get people together in groups of 6 to 8 to 12, and I ask them to send healing intention to one member of the group with a health challenge. And it's just astonishing what's been going on. And as I say, I've been doing this, hundreds and hundreds of times, and every single time the member of the group sent intention feels better. His arthritis is improved. His migraine is gone. His stomach pains are gone. One woman had an opacity in her eye. She could barely see, and she had about 80% of her eyesight restored. The lame are walking. And I was just astonished by this because, I never professed that this intention would be this great healing modality, and I certainly don't say that I'm a healer. And I started studying it some more. First of all, I thought I'm onto something really big and really new. And then my husband started looking into work about the Essenes, and he found that they had these healing intention circles. And even Jesus, before he was Jesus, he had these healing intention circles. Mm-hmm. So it's a very old and ancient practice. But the other thing about it is I'm not even sure it's the power of intention, because here's what else happened. The people sending the intention, they also got better. So it was the people in the group who had arthritis, who had migraines or whatever. First of all, they all started having very similar visualizations. That happens a lot. But also those senders started feeling better too. So the act of this group experience healed the healers. So I'm not sure, and I get this message from the Intention Experiments too. I survey our participants afterward, and invariably people say, my life has really changed. I'm more accepting and loving of everyone I meet. I'm more loving of strangers. I'm kinder to everybody. I love the planet more. I've resolved my differences. On and on, these amazing testimonials talking about this, what happened after this collective experience of oneness. And I think that's the secret to the whole thing, is it's like connecting to the mothership, where we suddenly feel this palpable feeling of unity in a small group or in a big group. And this is the way it's really supposed to be. Not about individual dog eat dog. It's about connection, deep connection. And people say in those little groups, I've never felt so supported. I've never felt more loved by having this healing intention sent by 7 other strangers. So I think that's what it is. It's not the power of intention. It's the power of connection, power of community. That is magic and is one of the ways to restore what we have lost.
On a global scale, what do you see from how you tested it to put it out to the world and on a global scale and transform the world? I guess some people are not into it. There's some limits also that you must have encountered in those experiments that could prevent that to work on a large scale?
Well, in my latest version of the Bond, I've got a paperback version coming out in the U.S. and I've titled it now because things have been so difficult. The subtitle is "How to Fix Your Falling Down World," and what I added to it was a whole how-to program, because I thought people really needed not just the new story, not just ideas to move forward, but a real program. And one of the elements in the Bond is essentially talking about how you can do it. You know, the idea of us trying to get everybody together, all together, doing all the same thing at the same time is going to be pretty tough. And that's pretty daunting for any individual. Because, you know, usually we say, well, what can I do? Our politicians don't even know how to speak to each other. How am I going to affect change? Mm-hmm. So what I talk about is how you can be the change agent, how you can start changing in the way you look at the world. Because the problem is we've been taught to see only individual things. That's been our hard wiring. Mm-hmm. So we can't see the whole anymore, not like native cultures. But you can very quickly learn how to see the whole. And that's what I try to provide programs for that, because seeing the whole means you can also see other people's points of view. And the only way you're going to connect with people is if you move past the idea of just connecting with people just like you. You know?
Tell us about that, because this is so essential. I feel it's such a crucial conversation to have, because we all feel at some point or another surprised in a situation, blocked, or we resist, we don't communicate, and then we lose our self-expression even when we can feel so connected and have such a deep conversation with people that have made already the shift. So yes. How do you see this new communication that can take place, or what is that step that we need to make?
Well, we have to change the way we relate to people, and this is another part of my program, is how do you do that? Because we've been hardwired to look at relationships kind of competitively, and so it still is I win, you lose model. I've got a Ford, I've got a Mercedes, I've got, I make $2,000, I make $3,000, and that's the way we think of relationships. The other aspect of relationships we usually have is seeking out sameness. We look to befriend and connect with people just like us. And we think, so they're the us. And then everybody else out there is the them. Even the 99%, the whole Occupy movement, much as I'm really in heart connection with them, I want to say, no, what we really need to do is make it the 100%. And that's the only way we're going to move forward. I think what they're doing is brilliant, and it's really identifying this unfairness that's so important in the model and why things are falling apart. But the ultimate aim has to be connecting, because the secret situation here is that 1% millionaires, there's some studies showing that the sickest people in any neighborhood, the most ill, are the people with the most money, because they develop a fortress mentality, and that keeps them away from everyone else. And because they distrust people so much, they feel isolated. That's so antithetical to the human need to connect, they get ill. So we need to learn how to connect with everybody. And to do that, it's again possible. We have to change the hard drive to not just looking for I and other people, not just looking for sameness, but looking for connection, whatever it takes. And that putting yourself at service to that connection creates instant closeness. And there are other ways of sharing deeply. People with different, very distinct paths can quickly become close by sharing deeply. Otherwise, experientially, doing that little group intention creates best friends out of strangers in 5 minutes. So there are many, many ways, but it really takes practicing moving into a new hard drive, erasing the old one, the old competitive individualistic model, and starting to work on a connected model.
How is the human race evolving, or where are some people you think at? What is possible in the future knowing this, and what capabilities, new capabilities can we develop?
Well, I think we have all of the capabilities, Lilu. They're all here. I mean, we have amazing capabilities. We're all healers. We're all healers. You know, it's not just the gifted few. We're all capable of powerful intention. We're capable of sending out our very specific messages and requests to the universe and having the universe respond. We're capable of all kinds of extrasensory mechanisms. That's all the stuff I talked about in the field that's now being proven, that we have the ability to see beyond our senses, to pick up information extrasensorily, to connect with other people despite differences or distance or time. You know, we have all of those human capabilities, but what we also have to do is adopt the new story. And the old story is what limits us. This old story about us being these lonely, competitive individuals in this lonely planet, in this lonely universe. That's that old materialistic model. Once we embrace the new science and what's really coming to the fore, we understand that we're much grander than what we've been told and that we have limitless capabilities. But the other thing we have to do is deal with the old hard drive, because we've been programmed to think small. We've been programmed to think individualistically and competitively, and we have to start thinking big.
And as Dr. Bruce Lipton mentions in his work, like those 80% of subconscious then unfortunately pops out or are present. And when we're not in the present moment, unfortunately, we're functioning from the past. And that's what it limits our potential. So there are some little things to I guess, to heal, to...
Yes. Well, my husband, who's written a book called Time Light that's just being released, talks about us being time. We are an agglutination of our undigested experiences from the past. And that becomes us, essentially. And the us that's really there, the us that's conscious, that has all of these amazing capabilities, gets that potential self, as he calls it, gets squashed down and overridden by this past self, which kind of inhabits us like an unwanted guest. And so I think that the way to stay present is working on some of these kinds of exercises that bring us back to the present that, you know, I talk about in the bond he has in Time Light, where you reprogram the hard drive.
So by reaffirming, by feeling it, because it's very much a feeling process.
Well, I think you also have to reprogram how you relate to people. I mean, I provide a whole program of how do you deal with deep divides without arguing and taking your corner? How do you connect with somebody who disagrees with everything you stand for? Well, there are many ways, but you need to learn a new way of relating. You know, and I think the only way we're going to be able to reach across the aisle to people who are not like us and not make it us versus them, but us plus them, is to learn these new skills. And there are new ways, there are simple ways to bring people together. For instance, in the bond, I talk about the power of what's called a superordinate goal. By that I mean, and this is really what those little healing intention circles are, they are a little group of people working together for a common goal. The science shows us whenever you do that, whether it's barn building, building a barn, or doing something in your neighborhood, or working together on a project at work, working together, not competitively, everybody's brainwaves start resonating in unison. We become one big superorganism. And they've also found, that when people work together for a common goal, they found this with the Oxford rowers, the Oxford Rowing Club, their team found, they were testing them, they found when they row together, each of them have a higher pain threshold than when they row individually. So working together as a group raises everybody's game. So any kind of little activity where a little group works together for a common goal creates instant connection, because that, it's not only brainwaves. When we work together for a common goal, it's not only brainwaves that operate in sync. All of your bodily processes start operating in sync when you send intention to each other. I mean, we found that in the science too. So, these are ways where bodies become one. People become a single unit. Mm-hmm. So it's that simple. Imagine if a neighborhood had, if you organized a little neighborhood group where people go around and clean up each other's backyards, clean up each other's gardens, take turns, doing something as simple as that. That creates this complete closeness. I guarantee you would revitalize your neighborhood. So I suppose my message for transformation is a message of, first of all, it has to be a transformation of the heart. Mm-hmm. We can't do the big stuff until everybody makes, an individual type of transformation. But also starting small is the really important thing. I have a story in my book about a woman called Marie, who was really tired of the very competitive dog-eat-dog atmosphere in her office. So she didn't know what to do. She thought, well, maybe what I'll do, every time I get my Coke in the afternoon from the Coke machine, I'll leave change there. And I'll leave a little sign that says, your Coke has been paid for. Keep the spirit alive and pay it forward. This totally freaks out her company. They start creating a little spy network to try to hover around the Coke machine to find out who the secret Santa is. So Marie moves upstairs and starts leaving donuts. She ups her game. And after a while, this became the only topic of conversation at this company for weeks and weeks. And it ultimately became the thing that changed the whole culture of that company. So the point is, something that small, a little act of generosity, just reminds people who we really are. It just eliminates that dog-eat-dog overlay and brings people into a connection with what's really there.
That story inspired many people, because I remember at the time I was paying the tolls for the person behind or leaving, at Starbucks, paying for the next coffee, and people are just so surprised, and you feel them so just like, what's going on? What's wrong? Like, let me find what's wrong here.
I know, and here's a scientific demonstration of why this works so well. There's a scientist at Harvard who studies social networks and how one person's behavior affects somebody else. And he found that one act of kindness like that, one little pay it forward kindness, affects 4 degrees down a social network. By that I mean it affects you. When you do it, it affects your friend, your friend's friend, your friend's friend's friend, and your friend's friend's friend. And remember, they're affecting their 4 degrees down the network too. So suddenly you create this contagion of generosity. And so I think that's really interesting. You watch people's faces. They're so used to people ripping them off that one little act of generosity becomes this unbelievable, powerful change agent.
Yeah, and it could be a change agent. We're not just talking about being nice to each other. This is a much stronger, more powerful, more meaningful, and can really transform the world. Because sometimes it's associated to, oh, you just be kind and loving. This is not this. We're talking about real big change.
I'm talking about all kinds of change. I'm talking about really, really relearning how to look at the world. A lot of the practices I have in the bond are about relearning how to see, relearning how to stay in the present. That's really difficult. Mm-hmm. relearning how to keep your sense of excitement and to be absolutely in total focus with the world, and being able to see everything there all the time, see like a native, essentially. All of those things take a lot of reprogramming. So there are some practices. It doesn't take long. I mean, there was one study I looked at about the Moken, who are such incredible natives in the South Pacific. They're able to dive in the water and see to the bottom of the water about 15 yards, about 15 meters, with no goggles. And they can distinguish between little things like little brown clams and little brown stones. Now, that's because they've trained themselves to see so holistically and so in such exquisite detail. But they tested European children, and they found within a few weeks of practicing certain techniques, they too could learn to do it. And that's true with the way we see the world. We can see the world much more like a native. We can see those interlocking parts, but we have to reprogram the hard drive.
I know your voice is, I know yesterday you had to speak and again tomorrow. Yes, thank you so much. I know that you live now in the UK because you're American, but you're an American journalist and author, but you also live in London.
I married a Brit and I have 2 children, so we're growing up English.
Is that how do you feel the London being the city, you know, a huge financial, if not the financial platform with Wall Street? Is there some changes happening there too? How do you see Europe and what its own transformational process?
This is one of the problems with, I think, many of the governments, is they're not going far enough. I see there's still being huge divides. I mean, one of the things I do talk about in the book, I was very interested about the Occupy movement because one of the things I wrote about in the book before Occupy came about was unfairness and how this was all a powder keg that was about to blow, and that the more unfair any society, the worse off everybody is, rich and poor, in terms of all the major social indicators like crime, violence, healthcare, all of those things. And, the U.S. is right at the bottom with the worst of everything and the largest unfairness. And the UK is something like 6th worst. So the UK still has its big issues of big divides, big unfairness. It is only focused on financial services and financial capital. And so I think it has a lot of work to do. But again, I want to emphasize, if we start looking at that becomes gives us a sense of impotence. How can we fix this? And I don't think that's where you start. I think you start with yourself, then the people around you, then your neighborhood, then your office, then your community. And you start by making these shifts, going through these processes yourself. You change the way you relate, and you truly can ignite a revolution everywhere around you that will ultimately light up the world. Remember, as it's been well said, every revolution started with a little handful of people.
Thank you, Lynne. Thank you so much for this juicy conversation. I so appreciate it. I wish you lots and lots of beautiful, loving, connected moments and magical encounters in the future. I'm really looking forward to the conference today and tomorrow, and look forward to another conversation in London.
Wonderful. I really look forward to it, Lilou. Thank you.
Thank you. Much love, my beautiful co-creators from Toulouse, south of France. Beautiful weather here. Bye. Juicy Co-Creators, Lilou here. I'm in Toulouse today, south of France, with Lynne McTaggart. Hello.
Hi, Lilou.
Thank you for accepting this interview. I'm so honored to be sitting next to you. What a surprise. I was here to interview Neil Donald Walsh, Barbara Max Hubbard, and here you are. I didn't know. I love this. I love this new connection.
Wonderful.
and how we can now share this with the world, and it can go out. To me, you bringing important information. You bridge the science with spirituality. You wrote many books, many bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiments, now The Bond. So I would love to start this conversation with how do you define science and spirituality? And are those changing? Are those evolving so that they can finally meet up? Because it was very, very much two separate words.
For several centuries, we've had a very dogmatic and materialistic view of the world, and that's been our science. And spirit has been very mystical and very other and very much about unity and unproven ideas. Well, now science is really proving what those ancient masters espoused for many centuries. It's talking about unity. It's talking about everything being part of a greater whole. And much of what we think of as our materialistic world has much more to it. We're far greater than what we've been told.
You're saying that instead of we are much stronger when we unite and weaker when we compete. Tell us how you prove that scientifically.
Well, my latest book, The Bond, is really all about answering the question, were we meant to compete? Was it meant to be this dog-eat-dog, this individualistic? Were we supposed to be every man for himself and survival of the fittest? And so this time, I looked not only at the physics, but at biology, psychology, anthropology, all the ologies. And the resounding answer is no. Nature doesn't have a drive for domination. The obvious conclusion from all of this science is that nature has a drive to wholeness. Nature has a drive to connect, and nature has created us to share, care, and be fair. We were hardwired to connect, and the main reason is because nature sees us as part of a greater whole in every way, from our subatomic particles to our bodies to our relationship with everyone around us and everything around us. There is a bond. And by bond, I'm on the Western world because his ideas came around just when mass printing evolved. And so they swept the globe, and they became a kind of defining mantra for every new burgeoning idea. It became a justifying principle for capitalism, became a justifying principle for colonialism, for one race being dominant over another race. Hitler loved Darwin. It became a justifying principle for business, for sociopathic behavior, everything. This idea of there's a struggle to survive and one person has to be top dog. And that has been the engine of just about every aspect of our societies in the West. Competition is the engine of our educational model, our financial model, our business model, our relationships, our neighborhoods. God forbid somebody else gets a connection so integral, so profound that it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins.
And what is the missing link then? Where have we gone wrong, or how can we find that bond again?
Well, the missing link really had to do with our understanding and our progress in the world. Science essentially writes the story we live by. And the story we've been told for the last several hundred years is the story of a very, very materialistic universe comprised of individual things that are very well-behaved things operating according to fixed laws in time and space. This is the worldview given to us by Newton. Mm-hmm. Then we have Darwin coming along saying that there essentially is not enough to go around. And so there is a struggle for survival, a survival of the fittest. And Darwin's ideas, it's impossible to underestimate his effect on